December 1st, 1993.
On the day the nation laid John F. Kennedy to rest, his successor, working to keep the country together, reached out to national leaders.
I think one of the great tributes that we can pay in memory of President Kennedy is to try to enact some of the great progressive policies that he sought to initiate.
Well, I'm going to support them all, and you can count on that, and I'm going to do my best to get other men to do likewise, and I'll have to have y'all's help. I never needed more than I do now.
Well, you know you have it, and just feel free to call on us for anything.
Tonight, new tapes, the private conversations of President Lyndon B. Johnson.
Let's get together.
This is ABC News Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
As those of you who watched our program last night know, the Lyndon Johnson Library in Austin, Texas, and the National Archives here in Washington have released many hours of audio tapes on which are recorded scores of telephone conversations between President Lyndon Baines Johnson and just about everyone he felt he needed to talk to in the days immediately following the assassination of John Kennedy. You can't get the full flavor of Lyndon Johnson by reading about him, or even by reading what he said. You have to listen to the man. We've been listening to him for much of the afternoon and evening to a new batch of tapes released only today by the National Archives. This is not the treacly, slightly sanctimonious Johnson who appeared on television, nor is this the man burdened and ultimately broken by the Vietnam War. This is Lyndon Johnson at the top of his game, one of the most skilled politicians ever to practice the art in Washington. This was certainly not the way that Johnson had wanted to become president, but now that he had the job, he knew what to do with it. Even as John Kennedy's body lay in state, Johnson was beginning the process of enacting the legislative package that would ultimately come to be known as the Great Society. November 24th, 2 days after the shooting in Dallas, Johnson placed a call to the head of the Urban League, Whitney Young.
I've got some ideas, and I'd be happy to sit down and talk with you, and the sooner the better, because
I got to get this funeral behind me, and I got all these heads of states coming. I got this, I've got to say something publicly. I'm going to a joint session, and I think I'll just tell them we're carrying on and ask for the passage of his civil rights bill and his tax bill.
Well, let me make a quick suggestion. You know?
Sure.
I think if you've got to make a statement, that it's good to point out that a bit of the civil rights thing, that the death of President Kennedy points out that hate anywhere that goes unchecked doesn't stop just with the weak. So this thing is now bigger.
I dictated the whole page on hate internationally, hate domestically, and just say that this hate that produces inequality, this hate that produces poverty, that's why we got to have a tax bill. The hate that produces injustice, that's why we got to have civil rights bill.
That's top.
It's a cancer that just eats out our national existence.
Precisely. That's wonderful.
The next day, November 25th, the day of the Kennedy funeral, LBJ is on the phone with newspaper columnist Joe Alsop. Johnson is arguing that the FBI should conduct the investigation into the shooting and that the information should be weighed and evaluated by local authorities in Texas. Alsop disagrees.
My lawyers, Joe, tell me that the White House must not, the president must not inject himself into local killings.
I agree with that, but in this case it does happen to be the killing of the president.
Right.
And the thing is, I'm not suggesting. Mind you, Mr. President, I'm not talking about an investigative body. I am talking about a body which will take all the evidence that the FBI has amassed when they have completed their inquiry and produce a public report on the death of the president.
Why can't the FBI transmit it?
Because no one, again, on the left, they won't believe the FBI. And the FBI doesn't write very well.
The funeral caps 3 days of national mourning. President Johnson, though, knows that the business of government requires his immediate attention. Late on the evening of the 25th, he talks with Martin Luther King Jr.
You know you have our support and backing.
Well,
because we know what a difficult period this is.
It's just an impossible period. We got a budget coming up that's we got nothing to do with. It's practically already made, and we got a civil rights bill that hadn't even passed the House, and it's November. And I'm going to ask the Congress Wednesday to just stay there till they pass them all. They won't do it, but we'll just keep them there next year till they do, and we just won't give up an inch.
Well, this is mighty fine. I think it's so imperative. I think one of the great tributes that we can pay in memory of President Kennedy is to try to enact some of the great progressive policies that he sought to initiate.
Well, I'm going to support them all, and you can count on that, and I'm going to do my best to get other men to do likewise, and I'll have to have y'all's help. I never needed more than I do now.
Well, you know you have it, and just feel free to call on us for anything.
Thank you so much, Martin.
The following day, November 27th, President Johnson goes before a joint session of Congress and makes the speech he had discussed 3 days earlier with Whitney Young.
And let all know we will extend no special privilege and impose no persecution. We will carry on the fight against poverty and misery and disease and ignorance in other lands and in our own. We will serve all the nation, not one sector or one sector or one group, but all Americans.
Later that day, Johnson hears from another civil rights leader, the congressman from Harlem, Adam Clayton Powell.
Did I do all right on civil rights? My friend, I just finished with CBS and telling them it was unequivocally the finest that I said it was more than I hoped for. And it was the finest that anyone could say. Forthright, it was really wonderful. You were at your best today. Absolutely superb. I don't know when you got the time to do it, though. Well, they had 34. You all were generous. You had 34 applauses in 24 minutes. I know you have good ghostwriters, but brother, that was Lyndon Baines Johnson. That wasn't any ghostwriter. That speech was absolutely magnificent. Well, thank you, Adam. I'll get in touch with this, and I'll be back in touch with you.
When we come back, LBJ managing, massaging, manipulating some of the media giants and members of Congress of the day.
This is ABC News Nightline, brought to you by Acura.
Most people have something they're willing to pay a premium for. For some, it's art. For some, it's entertainment. For others, it's travel. Acura. Some things are worth the price.
Skill FlexiCharge cordless tools all share the same battery pack. So when you need a recharge, they keep on working. The FlexiCharge interchangeable power system from Skill.
A woman who's been to hell and back tells the story.
The voices are back.
The chilling reality of schizophrenia. How some escape. Primetime Thursday.
Just for Feet, the world's largest athletic shoe store, has all the styles of Timberland, the most durable footwear made. Don't forget the boot. Handcrafted, high-performance boat shoes for sport or fashion. What about the boot? Versatile, casual footwear by Timberland provides comfort year-round. Tell them about the boot. And, of course, Timberland's notorious boots. Handmade, long-lasting, and so many different styles. Timberland boots. And shoes. Available now at Just for Feet, where the savings are big and your 13th pair is free.
Fresh, Southern, home-cooked food. Great prices on fresh, Southern, home-cooked food. All types of food. Fresh, Southern style. Just like going home at the Bell Meat Cafeteria in Bell Meat Plaza.
On the next Maury Povich Show, a local swingers club heats up a small town.
I've been with over 6,000 women.
How can you get satisfaction over watching your partner get off on somebody else?
On the next Maury.
Maury Povich, Thursday morning at 9 on Channel 2.
Nowhere is Lyndon Johnson more shameless in his use of flattery, and nowhere does it fall on more receptive ground than with the titans of the press. I read your column just this minute, Johnson tells Arthur Kroc of the New York Times. I just wanted you to know I was going to try to be worthy of it. With Walter Lippmann, perhaps the most famous journalist of his day, the President of the United States is almost coy. Could I drop by, asks LBJ, and bum a drink off of you? The startled Lippmann gives Johnson his address, and the President says he'll be over in about 10 minutes. In a phone conversation with Katharine Graham, the publisher of the Washington Post, Johnson is at his raucous best, although here, too, we have to rely on transcripts since the tapes are not yet available. "Hello, my sweetheart, how are you?" says the President. "Well," says Mrs. Graham, "I'm fine. Are you?" "You know, there's only one thing I dislike about this job," says Lyndon Johnson, "is that I'm married and I can't ever get to see you. I'd like to break out of here and be like one of these young animals down on my ranch, jump a fence." On every phone call, though, Johnson has a purpose. With Mrs. Graham, he wants her newspaper's support in getting Congress to hold civil rights hearings. In a conversation with Senator James Eastland of Mississippi, Johnson tries to head off Senate hearings into the Kennedy assassination. He wants Eastland's support for a broad-based commission.
I had this feeling, I don't know, it's very confidential. I haven't proposed it to anybody, and I don't know that I would. But we've got a pretty strong states' rights question here, and I have had some hesitancy to just start having a bunch of congressional inquiries into violation of a state statute. And it might...
Well, you see, you've got a bill in to make it up.
Yeah, I know it, but you haven't got any law, and it might set a precedent that you wouldn't want to have. This is a very explosive thing and could be a very dangerous thing to the country.
Well,
and a little publicity could just fan the flames. What would you think about... What would you think about if we could work it out of getting somebody in the court, somebody in the House, somebody in the Senate, and have a real high-level judicial study of all the facts?
With Eastland on board, Johnson goes after Democratic Congressman Hale Boggs, whom he wants on the commission.
I would think perhaps the best way to approach this is try to get a couple of members of the House, a couple of the Senate, maybe somebody in the court. We don't want to say anything about that to anyone, but I've talked to the Speaker and I've talked to the leader of the Senate and the Justice Department, and that seems to be the consensus best thing to do. I wanted to...
That's what I had intended to put in a resolution, but I had no intention of doing it until I talked with you.
Right. Well, let's hold back. Let me clear that, see how it goes, and I got to talk to some other people about it, but I wanted you to know what we were thinking.
My thought was that you might put a couple of people on there from the public, too, Mr. President.
Well, we might do that.
With his old friend and advisor Abe Fortas, whom he will eventually nominate to the Supreme Court, Johnson worries that word of the commission will get out before he has a chance to line up its members.
Well, we need it right quick, though, because they're already announcing it in the House and Senate and all over the damn place. When you talk to the leader, it's just like talking into a big microphone.
I know, and that's why I asked Nick to get over there right away. All right. This morning, and he's going to take the general and do it.
Well, how many men the commission was going to have?
Well, if you had Dulles and a general, and 2 from the House, 2 from the Senate, and the Chief Justice, that'd be marvelous. Simply marvelous. On the House side, we could get Hale Boggs.
He's talking all the damn time. He's a good fella, but he's done announced it in the House.
Who's announced it?
Hale Boggs got down and told him. You see, I had to tell him what I was contemplating.
Oh.
So he got down on the floor of the House. Some jerk got up and said something, so he thought he had to show his knowledge.
Oh, Lord. Yeah, I thought you meant he just announced that the House is going to investigate.
Well, he announced there's going to be a high-level commission.
I see.
That's why I'm waiting. And I don't know, I guess we have to talk to these fellas before we announce they're going to appoint them, don't we?
Yes, sir.
All right. I'm not much. I think we ought to order them to do it, then let them bellyache.
All right. I think that's...
Yeah, we'll have to get him. Yeah, okay.
Thank you, sir.
You call me now.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Johnson does not quite order Senator John Sherman Cooper of Kentucky to serve on the commission to investigate the Kennedy assassination, but neither does he ask. He sort of assumes it.
This commission will be established before the end of the day by executive order. Its functions will be to receive and to evaluate information obtained by all sources. The executive branch to satisfy itself that the truth is known as far as we can know it, and report its findings and conclusions to me, to the American people, and to the world.
I think that's fine.
Now, I want you to go on that commission.
What?
Yes.
Well, if you want me to go on it, I'll do it, of course.
Thank you, my friend.
Yes, sir.
Bye. Don't say a word about it now.
I won't say a thing.
Bye.
In the space of a few days, while the nation is still reeling in the aftershock of the Kennedy assassination, Lyndon Baines Johnson has smothered any thought of a congressional investigation in either house. He has lined up support from key black leaders, labor leaders, business leaders, and leaders of his own party for what will be the most ambitious domestic legislative program since the New Deal, and he has already begun his campaign for the 1964 presidential election. When we come back, I'll be joined by a man who served Lyndon Johnson in the White House, Jack Valenti.
Before, after. Before, after. Yeah. Before, after. How do you get from before to after? So bad. Simple. Apple Desktop Publishing. It makes everything you do look better than before.
We designed a new car. We created a new class. We developed new engineering. We created a new standard of performance. We redefined value. Introducing the C-Class. It wasn't designed to compete with other cars. It was designed to replace them. The new C-Class starting at under $30,000.
Tomorrow, exercise is one of the keys to good health, but is there such a thing as too much?
Also, how they publish the news in war-torn Sarajevo on the next Good Morning America.
They've been fighting forever.
Idiot.
Eat my shorts. No. Holy. Oh, my. There's a reason.
She's mine. Says who? Women get obsessed with me. It's like one of them fatal attraction things.
Jack Valenti, Walter Matthau, and Margaret. Grumpy old maid.
Do the world a favor, pull your lip over your head and swallow.
Rated PG-13. Special sneak preview, December 4th.
It's never been your style to live like anyone else, so I start now. The American Dimensions Collection from Ethan Allen. Eclectic and most agreeably priced for people who really love to live at home. Right now, there's a sale going on at your local Ethan Allen.
Hi, Gary Willingham at Toyota of Gallatin. Now if you buy a new car, truck, or even a used car, you can spend 30 seconds in our new cash machine and win lots and lots of holiday cash.
Get the 94 Toyota pickup or the 93 GT sports truck for $0 down, low payments, no payments until February of 94, and $900 in Christmas cash.
And keep all the money you can grab in our money machine while it's turned on, maybe hundreds of dollars.
We've got 93 pre-title program Corollas loaded as low as $11,995.
Toyota of Gallatin.
Call us now.
Joining us now live from our Los Angeles bureau, Jack Valenti. He was riding just 6 cars back from President Kennedy during that faithful motorcade ride through Dallas. Hours later, he joined Vice President Johnson aboard Air Force One for his swearing in and became President Johnson's special assistant at the White House. He is now the president of the Motion Picture Association of America. Jack, I don't think I've ever heard anybody work the phone the way that Lyndon Johnson did. Now, you must have heard him back in those days.
You know, this is like opening a locked box, Ted, and out flies memories that bring back this extraordinary man, the single most formidable political leader I've ever known or ever will know. And if Toscanini was a conductor, Johnson used the phone as a great violinist would do, his Stradivarius. And the melodies that he composed really formed the great society.
Let's begin at the bottom, with us, I mean, in the press. When I hear Johnson calling up, Arthur Kroc or talking to Walter Lippmann, and saying in effect to Lippmann, hey, can I bum a drink off you? I'll be over there in 10 minutes. Explain to me, he must have talked sometimes about how he worked the press. Can you give us a little bit of insight into that?
Well, I don't think he ever really put down on paper or had a diagram of how he worked the press, but you use the word shameless. That's what he was. To Johnson, he always kept his eye on the distant objective and not the one nearest him. And everything he did was calculated toward getting him the passage of the legislation he was determined to achieve. As a matter of fact, Ted, on the very first night he was president, I sat with him along with Bill Moyers and Cliff Carter. And that very night, he wasn't president more than 10 hours when he was sketching out what we later come to describe as the Great Society of medical insurance and human justice and civil rights and aid to education and all the things that he did later. He knew what he wanted to do, and as once he said, now that I got the power, I aim to use it. And everything he did was directed at his overall objective. He never let up. I don't know of anyone who stayed on that telephone from morning, noon, and night, and using it as his Excalibur, his great sword. Press, congressmen, senators, big Democratic givers, advisors, whomever. He was extraordinary.
Over the past couple of nights, Jack, we've heard sort of a variation of themes here. Maybe you can sort of give us a sense of some of the melodies that he played on that phone, and perhaps even give us an instance or two where you were on the other end.
Well, the thing he had to do, and he said this on the night he was president, he had to show the country that the Constitution was intact, that while a president was dead, the president lives. And he had to show that the country was being governed. And so he began to enlist allies. He had to do that. The first that we're just hearing now, and I must say I'd forgotten some of this, is the Warren Commission, to let the country know what really happened so that their anxieties would be eased. But at the same time, he was gathering his strength for the Civil Rights Bill, but most of all for the tax cut, which he had to get out of the Senate, where it had been languishing in the Senate Finance Committee. So every hour of every day, he was doing 2 or 3 tasks to allay the fears of the country, to organize his efforts to win congressional victory for the bills he wanted to pass, and as you said earlier, laying the groundwork for the election, which was just 1 year off. He was doing all those things simultaneously.
In fact, I mean, by December 2nd, and the only reason we didn't play it is we don't yet have those tapes, but I've read some of the transcripts, he is already talking to different people about what he needs to do. And he's talking about how he's got the Jewish vote, he's got the black vote, he's got the labor vote, and he is already depicting himself as the strongest possible candidate. Was he worried that some other candidate might crop up?
Lyndon Johnson was a man who believed that you run scared, that when you've got 90% of the vote, you better get 95. He never let up for one moment. Remember now, he was the greatest parliamentary commander the Senate has ever seen. He was a vote counter. He always knew where the votes were, and he always made sure he had more than enough votes when he finally called for the vote. And so the presidential campaign was to him just a larger arena that he practiced in the Senate.
Why was he so worried about either a House investigation or a Senate investigation of the assassination? I mean, the one thing he was sure he didn't want, he wasn't initially clear that he wanted to have that Warren Commission. Initially, as we heard, he wanted to put it in the hands of the Texas Attorney General. But he sure didn't want it to be either in the House or the Senate. Why?
Well, because you've got 535 members of the House and the Senate, and it's less easier to control. Whereas if you had 7 men of probity and wisdom and prestige, you had a better chance to keep things on an even keel. As he said, not quite sure what some maverick's going to do, some crazy guy on the floor of the House or some senator who wants to make a name for himself, and things can go skidding off the edge of the precipice. He wanted to make sure that he kept this thing within some kind of rational bounds.
Jack, in the few seconds that we have left, what did he ultimately come to believe about the Kennedy assassination?
He ultimately came to believe, though he had no evidence, as he told me, and later on he even revealed this in a television interview with Walter Cronkite, he believed that the Cubans somehow were back of it. They either had inveigled Oswald into doing this pitiful drifter, or they had some role in it, though he told me several times he had absolutely no evidence, and neither did the FBI or anybody else. But his inner political instinct guided him toward that kind of a conclusion.
Jack Valenti, thanks so much for being with us. A real pleasure having you.
Thank you, Ted.
I'll be back in a moment.